Welcome to another episode of Books in Bytes. Today we're diving into some really thought-provoking pages you've shared from Jostein Gaarder's Sophie's World.
That's right. And our plan isn't just to skim the surface. We're aiming to dig deep into these specific excerpts.
Exactly. We want to pull out the core philosophical ideas, trace the historical arguments, and, maybe most intriguingly, unravel this curious story within a story that develops.
It's like getting two journeys for the price of one with this material. You get this accessible history of philosophy, but it's wrapped up in the narrative of Sophie and her teacher, Alberto.
And that narrative takes a turn, doesn't it? Their own philosophical journey starts making them question their own reality. It's quite meta.
It really is, unpacking how the philosophy shapes the story and how the story itself becomes a philosophical problem that's key to understanding these pages.
Okay, so let's start where the book starts, with that fundamental human itch, that basic curiosity.
The big questions, like where does the world come from? Or even where did space come from? Simple questions, but incredibly deep.
And the source points out something interesting, that kind of innate feeling that the idea of something always existing with no beginning. Well, it feels a bit wrong, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's an intuitive resistance to infinity stretching backward forever. It makes us search for an origin, a starting point for, well, everything.
The book ties this right into what it calls potentially the most important thing in life.
Now, it's careful here. It acknowledges that basic needs, food, warmth, safety, company, obviously come first if you don't have them.
Of course, you can't philosophize on an empty stomach, as they say.
But once those are met, this other need emerges, the need to figure out who we are and why we are here. It's about understanding, not just surviving.
And this isn't presented as just a hobby. It's framed as participating in a fundamental human debate, one that's as old as man has lived on this planet.
Right. It puts philosophical inquiry on a different level entirely. More significant, the book argues, than, say, keeping track of Olympic medals. It's about the biggest picture possible.
I love the analogy they use, the white rabbit pulled from the magician's hat.
We're like that rabbit, finding ourselves in this vast universe, this hat.
But the crucial difference is, we realize we're part of something mysterious. We want to know how the trick works.
And then they refine it, which I think is brilliant. Maybe the whole universe is the rabbit, and we're like tiny insects living deep in its fur.
And the philosophers.
They're the ambitious insects trying to crawl all the way up the hairs to look the magician right in the eye. It's a fantastic image for that relentless quest for understanding.
It really captures the scale of the challenge. But the sources also lament something most of us probably experience, taking the world for granted.
Yes, that fading of childhood wonder. Remember seeing something utterly new as a kid? An elephant, maybe? The book calls it a rapturous performance.
But that sense of awe, it tends to fade. We get used to things. The source says this happens long before we even learn to think philosophically. Calls it a pity.
And the antidote proposed, thought experiments. Actively trying to break out of habitual thinking, to see the world with fresh eyes again.
Sophie herself gives a great example. Her mom finds her playing with Lego.
And Sophie insists, I'm not playing. I'm doing a very complicated philosophical experiment.
It's perfect. She connects playfulness directly with deep thinking, questioning why we ever feel we have to stop playing, or asking those fundamental questions.
That playful experiment leads us right into the next part of our discussion, how people have tried to answer these big questions throughout history, moving from myth to more, let's say, material explanations.
Right. Before philosophy as we know it, there were myths. The source uses the example of Thor in Norway.
People genuinely believed thunder and lightning were Thor riding his chariot, swinging his hammer. It wasn't just a story. It explained a powerful natural phenomenon.
And it was embedded in their language, too. Thor D or N. Thor's roar for thunder, Aska, in Swedish God's Journey.
Plus, the practical connection. Thunder often meant rain, vital for farmers. So Thor wasn't just a storm god. He was linked to fertility, to survival.
This mythological worldview is then contrasted with the early philosophers, the pre-Socratics,
who started looking for explanations within nature itself, not just relying on divine actions. They wanted natural causes for natural events.
And one of the first big philosophical fights was about change. How can things constantly seem to transform? Parmenides versus Heraclitus.
Empedocles looked at their arguments and saw the problem. They both assumed the world was made of only one basic thing.
Parmenides, using pure reason, argued, well, that nothing really changes. Water stays water. fundamentally. It can't become a fish.
A very bold stance, basically saying our senses deceive us about change. The source notes he must have seemed quite eccentric.
Empedocles, though, tried to reconcile this. He agreed pure substances don't change, like Parmenides said, but he also agreed with Heraclitus, you have to trust your senses, and they clearly show change.
So his solution was ditching the single element idea. He proposed 4 roots: earth, air, fire, water. They mix and separate, creating the appearance of change, but the roots themselves are eternal and unchanging.
Clever. And Anaxagoras took it even further, didn't he? With infinite tiny particles.
Yes, invisible particles. And the key idea, even the tiniest particle contains fragments of everything else.
The example used is quite vivid. If skin and bone come from milk, then tiny bits of skin and bone must already be in the milk.
The source clarifies this with the hologram analogy, break a hologram, and each piece still shows the whole picture. It illustrates how Anaxagoras might have conceived of this everything in everything.
Which leads us nicely to Democritus and his atom theory. This was a huge leap.
Absolutely. He proposed an unlimited number of atoms, varying in shape and size.
And these atoms were eternal, unchanging, indivisible, echoing Parmenides' idea of eternal blocks.
But crucially, they weren't all the same. That was key. If they were identical, how could they form such different things? Poppies, goatskin, hair?
So the variety came from their shapes, round ones, jagged ones, hooking together differently.
Exactly. Some round and smooth, others irregular, allowing them to combine in countless ways to form all the objects we see. Infinite atoms, infinite variety.
And his worldview was purely mechanistic, right? No divine plan, just atoms moving according to necessary laws.
Precisely. Everything happens mechanically following inevitable laws of necessity. Every event has a natural cause inherent in the atoms themselves.
The quote they include is telling he'd rather discover one natural cause than be king of Persia. Shows his dedication.
He even tried to explain perception and the soul in atomic terms. Seeing the moon involved moon atoms hitting the eye.
In the soul.
Made of special, fine, round soul atoms. When you die, they just scatter and eventually might become part of a new soul, a complete materialistic system.
It's incredible to trace that arc from Thor's hammer to soul atoms.
Yeah.
This brings us to the next major shift in focus, from the cosmos to the human being. Ethics, knowledge, the human condition. Starting with Delphi.
Ah, yes, the oracle at Delphi, hugely influential. And that famous inscription, "Know thyself."
What did that really mean in context?
It was a caution against hubris. Remember your limits, remember you're mortal, you can't escape your destiny. The Greek tragedies often illustrate this fate catching up no matter what.
And Socrates is the pivotal figure in this shift towards focusing on humanity.
Definitely. Unlike the pre-Socratics looking at nature, Socrates was concerned with man and his place in society, ethics, virtue, how to live a good life.
Cicero's quote sums it up perfectly. Socrates called philosophy down from the sky, forced her to investigate life, ethics, good and evil. A major redirection.
Then moving forward a bit, we encounter the Stoics. Their big theme seems to be acceptance.
Yes, accepting what happens, sickness, death, as part of the unbreakable laws of nature. Everything is predetermined, follows necessity.
So complaining is futile. The path to peace is accepting your destiny calmly.
And this applies to good fortune too. Accept it unperturbed.
Exactly. It echoes the cynic's view that external events, good or bad, are ultimately unimportant compared to inner virtue, hence Stoic calm.
Now, the sources circle back to a core philosophical problem. How do we actually know anything? Empiricism versus rationalism again, but through Locke, Hume, and Kant.
Locke, the empiricist, famously challenged Descartes with the question, "There is nothing in the mind except what was first in the senses."
Meaning, no innate ideas. We start as a blank slate, a tabula rasa.
That's Locke's view. All knowledge comes from experience. Ideas not traceable to experience are suspect, potentially false. Even words like God or eternity need grounding in experience to avoid being just fantasy.
He used that gold panning analogy, didn't he? Sifting through thoughts to find the valuable bits based on real experience.
Right. Most thoughts are like sand and clay. Look for the glint of gold, the experienced fact.
Hume pushes empiricism even further towards skepticism, especially about cause and effect.
For Hume, knowledge comes from sensations. He distinguishes between subjective perception, like the taste of an orange, where there's no right or wrong,
and objective properties, like its roundness or weight, things where you can be right or wrong based on facts.
but causality. That's where Hume gets really skeptical. Why are we so sure a stone will fall every time?
Because it always has.
Exactly. But that's based on past experience, habit, not logical proof. We don't experience the necessary connection itself, just the sequence of events. It's an expectation, not a certainty derived from reason.
The book captures the reaction, calling it horrible, but also necessary philosophical questioning.
Hume isn't denying patterns in nature, but warning against assuming we understand the underlying laws just from observation. Seeing only black crows doesn't mean a white crow is impossible.
Which leads to that great line. Hunting for the white crow is science's principal task. Look for the exceptions. Challenge assumptions.
Then comes Kant, trying to synthesize these views. He starts with the empiricists. Yes, knowledge begins with sensation.
But he adds the rationalist element. Our minds aren't just passive receivers. They have inherent structures, conditions that shape how we perceive the world.
The glasses analogy is helpful here. Tinted glasses don't create the world, but they determine how you see it. Our minds are like those glasses, organizing sensory input.
Kant also gave us the categorical imperative in ethics. Two main formulations mentioned.
First, act only according to principles you could will to be universal laws. Could everyone act this way?
And second, treat humanity in yourself and others always as an end, never merely as a means. Don't exploit people, basically, including yourself.
It's presented as a formal framework, like the Golden Rule, but more rigorous. It tests the principle of your action, though, as the source notes, Hume might still say it's an assertion not provable by reason alone.
And finally, Kant's practical postulates, things like God, free will, immortality.
Which Kant believed couldn't be proven by pure reason, unlike Descartes thought.
So why believe in them?
Kant argued they are necessary assumptions for the sake of praxis, for morality to make sense. It is a moral necessity to assume the existence of God, he said. They provide the foundation for a meaningful ethical life, even if unprovable.
Okay, that covers a lot of ground on knowledge and ethics. The next section broadens out again, looking at how different cultures, beliefs, and science interact and evolve, starting with the Indo-European link.
This is fascinating. The idea that ancient Indian texts, Greek philosophy, and Norse myths share related languages
Points to a common ancestral Indo-European culture.
That's the theory presented. And a key shared element was polytheism, belief in many gods. The evidence is in the names Dyaus, Zeus, Jupiter, Eye of Pikr, Tyr, all likely variants of an ancient sky god name, linguistic fossils showing a shared origin.
This shared background sets the stage for the dramatic encounter between Christianity and the Greco-Roman world.
Described as a major cultural revolution, Jesus, coming from outside that Greco-Roman sphere, brought radical ideas. Redemption, radical love, forgiveness.
A dangerous message, like Socrates' questioning, leading ultimately to the cross. The parallel is drawn quite explicitly.
And Christian doctrine differed from Greek ideas of demigods. Jesus wasn't half God, half human, but perfect God, perfect man, fully both. A unique concept.
St. Augustine is presented as a key figure trying to bridge these worlds.
Yes, bending backward to reconcile Greek philosophy, especially Platonism, with Judeo-Christian thought.
His solution for creation versus an eternal world was clever, putting Plato's eternal ideas inside the mind of God before creation.
Exactly. Preserving eternal forms within a creation narrative. And his view on evil aligning with Neoplatonism. Evil isn't a force, but an absence of God, a falling away from the inherent goodness of creation.
Then we get a sketch of the Middle Ages, roughly 400 to 1400s. The early part sounds like decline.
Cultural decline compared to Rome, yes. Crumbling cities, infrastructure, trade shifting to barter, feudalism, population drops. Even Roman ruins used as building material, sad for archaeologists.
But later centuries saw a revival, the High Gothic period.
Around 1100 onwards, yes. Marked by the building of magnificent cathedrals, seen as celebrations of faith.
And a key intellectual spark came from Arab scholars in Spain preserving Aristotle.
Critically important. When Aristotle was rediscovered and translated into Latin, it spurred new interest in science and logic, but also created tension. How to balance Aristotle's reason with Christian revelation.
Which led to figures like Thomas Aquinas trying to synthesize faith and reason.
Making the case that Aristotle and Christianity could coexist, even complement each other. And the source reminds us, women thinkers like Hildegard of Bingen also existed, despite the male dominance.
Then comes the Renaissance, the rebirth, what was reborn.
The focus shifted from God as the sole center back to man himself, echoing Greek humanism. but with a stronger emphasis on the unique individual.
Leading to the Renaissance man ideal, the worship of genius.
Yes, and a renewed interest in the human form anatomy, dissection for art and medicine, the return of the nude in art after centuries of prudery, man becoming bold enough to be himself.
And man's role changed too, from just part of creation to actively shaping it.
A huge shift, intervening in nature, forming it after his own image. The source contrasts this with the medieval view. A moon landing would be unthinkable then, but fits the Renaissance spirit perfectly.
Fast forward again to the mid-19th century and the naturalistic current,
Which accepts only nature and the sensory world as real. Humans are just part of nature, explained by natural laws.
and two key figures here delivered an affront to mankind's naive egoism: Darwin and Freud.
Let's start with Darwin. The evidence from embryology has mentioned how similar embryos of different mammals look early on, hinting at common ancestry.
And his mechanism wasn't acquired characteristics, like Lamarck thought.
No proof for that. Darwin was inspired partly by artificial selection, how humans have bred animals and plants for desirable traits for millennia.
Choosing the best milkers, the fastest horses.
Right, a conscious selection process. Darwin then observed natural variation individuals within a species are all slightly different.
Like the blue drink causing unexpected changes for Sophie in the book, nature provides variety.
And putting variation together with the struggle for existence leads to natural selection. Those with advantageous variations are more likely to survive and reproduce. Only the best have survived.
The reaction was huge, wasn't it? Seen as dangerous, embarrassing.
Absolutely. It challenged Genesis, humanity's special place. Ruskin's quote about geologists' hammers hitting the Bible captures that conflict.
And it raises modern dilemmas, too, like medicine interfering with natural selection.
The source touches on that concern that saving everyone, regardless of genetic fitness, might weaken the species' overall resilience. The idea of hereditary hygiene, a controversial implication.
Darwin's tree of life diagram is mentioned, visualizing relatedness.
And the ultimate origin of life, how did the first self-replicating molecule governed by DNA arise from non-living matter? Still a major scientific question.
Then there's Freud, the archaeologist of the soul.
His model of the mind is like an iceberg. The conscious tip and the vast unconscious depths below, full of repressed desires and memories.
Psychoanalysis aims to bring those repressed, pathogenic things to the surface.
Yes, remembering and re-experiencing them in therapy is seen as the path to healing.
Freud also talked about imagination and reason in creativity.
If all our unconscious impulses were expressed, it'd be chaos. Reason selects and orders. Imagination generates the raw material, turn the sheep loose, but reason reflection composes it into art or coherent thought.
A balance between letting go and imposing structure. And this idea of letting go, being bold, connects to philosophy.
And crucially connects to the meta-narrative. That idea of finding initiative or stubbornness becomes very important for Sophie and Alberto later.
Right. All this philosophy sets the stage for the story itself to take a strange turn. Section 5. The meta-narrative unfolds.
It starts subtly. Sophie finds a scarf with Hilda written on it. Who is Hild? Why do their paths seem to cross?
Then Alberto slips of the tongue, calling Sophie Hild. She gets suspicious, calls him a villain.
And we learn about Major Albert Nag, Hild's father, a UN observer in Lebanon, sending postcards to Hild that Sophie keeps finding.
The messages get weirder. The banana peel message. Here I am again, Hilde. Happy birthday. Alberto calls the sender disturbed but ingenious.
The sea serpent incident, tied to warnings about not trusting your senses, it feels staged.
The airplane banner, Happy Birthday, appearing right as thunderclouds gather for Sophie's party. Too coincidental.
And the ultimate intrusion. The Major himself appears at the party, interacting, leaving shopping lists with instructions for Hilde that relate to Sophie's philosophical journey. It's undeniable interference.
Meanwhile, Hilde, in her reality, is reading their story in the ring binder and reacting.
She shivers reading about Athens, thinks it is so about a philosophical passage. The philosophy is affecting her too.
And she gets angry reading about Sophie going to the Major's cabin, a place she knows the lines blur.
The airplane chapter is the point of no return, explicitly connecting the worlds. The question becomes existential for Sophie and Alberto. To be or not to be means, are we real, or just thoughts encircled by the mind?
Then Alberto drops the bombshell. Their creator, this will or spirit, could be Hild's father. It's all out in the open.
Hild realizes her father decides everything, leaving Sophie and Alberto seemingly with no free will at the end of the road. Sophie even asks her mom if life is a dream.
Yeah, so they confront it. Alberto insists they continue philosophy, their last chance. They apply Cartesian doubt to themselves. Are we real or just a birthday diversion?
Facing the contradiction, if fictional, they can't truly believe anything. Their dialogue is imaginary. Sophie suggests giving up.
But Alberto proposes a plan based on finding initiative. Maybe the major doesn't decide everything instantly. Maybe in the moment of creation.
There's a tiny window for them to act independently, a weak impulse against his heavy artillery, but maybe possible.
Their stubbornness, their will to be real cannot be ruled out. That's the plan.
And we see them try to act on it. Sophie takes the magic mirror from the major's cabin, rowing away a symbolic escape.
Alberto yells in the cafeteria, gets no reaction from the unreal patrons. Then the sharply defined old woman appears.
Who welcomes them to eternity and says she's from Grimm's fairy tales. They identify themselves as from a book on philosophy. They've crossed into another fictional reality.
Alberto notes the reversal. Before, the other reality watched them unseen. Now they watch another reality, Grimm, unseen by it.
Sophie adds, now Hild and the major don't know where they are. Revenge is sweet. But they still acknowledge the major's power to intervene.
The final angel story reinforces this idea of multiple layers of reality. The man can't pass rock like the angel, but both pass through mist, different levels of solidity.
Which perfectly encapsulates the ambiguity they and we are left with.
Wow. So wrapping up this deep dive into these specific pages, we started with those huge fundamental questions about existence itself. Why are we here? Where does it all come from?
We trace the answers through history, from myth, like Thor, to the pre-Socratics grappling with change and matter, like Parmenides, Heraclitus, Democritus.
Then we turned inward, looking at human knowledge and ethics. Delphi's know thyself, Socrates' focus on human life, Stoic acceptance, the empiristrationalist debate with Locke, Hume, Kant.
We saw ideas collide and evolve, the Indo-European roots, Christianity meeting the Greco-Roman world, Augustine's synthesis, the Middle Ages, the Renaissance humanism, and the challenges from Darwin and Freud's naturalism.
And throughout it all, that fascinating meta-narrative unfolded. Sophie and Alberto discovering their potential fictional nature, questioning their reality, their free will.
And ultimately attempting to assert their own stubbornness, their own initiative, against the seeming control of Hilda's father, the major.
It's such a clever blend, using a story about learning philosophy to make you do philosophy, questioning the very nature of reality alongside the characters.
Exactly. The meta-narrative forces you to confront those big questions. What is real? Do we have free will if our reality might be constructed or influenced by something beyond our perception? How do we find agency within a system?
It definitely leaves you thinking. And that final angel story really sticks with you. If reality exists in these different layers, different degrees of solidity,
how truly certain can any of us be about the fundamental nature of the reality we experience every day? It's a profound question to ponder.
A fantastic exploration. If this discussion has piqued your interest, you can grab a copy of the book using the link in the description.
And don't forget to subscribe to Books and Bytes for more deep dives into fascinating texts.